welcome to This Week in Travel. I'm Michelle Robson, editor of Turning Left for Less. In this week's episode, I'll be looking at the latest news, including the impending strike at Heathrow, and I'll also be looking at what are the best lounges in Heathrow's Terminal 3 for oneworld status holders and people travelling in business class with oneworld airlines. This week in the news, unfortunately, it's more bad news in terms of strikes. We've seen another German strike with German airports closed, and now it looks like the Heathrow security staff at Terminal 5 will be going ahead with their strike. Earlier this week, talks broke down between Heathrow management and the union. Unfortunately, it's also the beginning of the busy Easter period for travel, where normally we'd see queues in the terminal anyway. So, in my opinion, it's not boding well. Heathrow say that they have contingency in place and that they have up to 1,000 extra management staff in place. However, how many of these are actually trained to do security? I'm guessing not that many. And also we know that they are moving staff from the other terminals at Heathrow. So if you are travelling through terminals 2, 3 or 4, you may also see delays compared with normal, because obviously they will have less staff because they've had to move some over to Terminal 5. They're advising people to not take more than 2 items of hand luggage, but to be honest, that's what you're advised anyway. British Airways have cancelled around about 32 flights a day. It's not affecting their long-haul flights. If you are affected, it should have already shown on Manage My Booking and you should have been notified, but it's worth keeping track of your booking and making sure that there's no last-minute changes. This is particularly important if you've booked with a travel agent, as occasionally this is where things go wrong and people don't get notified. If you book with British Airways, make sure that your mobile number is in the booking. I've always found them very good at notifying cancellations. I've always had an email and a text in a fairly prompt manner as soon as it's been cancelled. So if you are affected, they will offer you an alternative flight usually. Sometimes, like at this time that's very busy and where they're not selling additional flights during the strike period, then obviously this could be difficult. Now, they should also offer you the chance to fly with other airlines, which they have confirmed that is available, but it will not show online. You'll have to try and speak to them. Obviously, this could be quite difficult on the phone because everybody's going to try and get through. So you can try the people in the terminal as well. There's also online chat with BA, but they're not able to do the full function of speaking to someone on the phone. If you can't get through and you've tried and you desperately want to go, then I would suggest just booking your own flight and then claiming afterwards. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that because this strike is nothing to do with British Airways, it's from Heathrow Airport, it means you will not be entitled to compensation in terms of delays and cancellations, which I know feels a bit unfortunate, but as I said, the British Airways have no control over this strike, and I'm pretty sure they'll be putting some fairly high pressure on Heathrow to resolve the strike. The strike is over pay, and if I'm honest, I actually support the security staff here. Heathrow already don't have enough staff. There's frequently closures of the lane in the first wing in Terminal 5, and also the fast track for security for transfers is very rarely open, whereas pre-COVID this was open pretty much all the time. So it's obvious they're not paying enough to actually get enough staff, and they're paid the bare minimum anyway, so I think that they should actually be paying them more, and then they might actually be able to have the proper number of staff. Also, more bad news, Air France and KLM have announced that they will start charging for business class seat allocation. So at the moment, British Airways already does this unless you have status, but KLM and Air France will be following with this in April. It won't be like Qatar or Finnair where there's a business light fare. It will be on all business class fares. It doesn't apply to the higher levels of Flying Blue, but it doesn't seem to apply if you have status within the SkyTeam Alliance, which is pretty annoying because I know a lot of people probably now have status through their Virgin membership. So it's a bit unfortunate. The fees for the booking the seats looks pretty high as well, somewhere between 70 and 90 euros per seat. So if you've got a connecting flight with 2 long haul flights, then it could get quite expensive. However, the good news is it only applies to long haul and it does not currently apply to US flights. So it's only a fairly limited number of flights it applies to. You can still select your seat at check-in which opens 24 hours before. So at least you can still get one, but the chances are if you're travelling in a group, you may not necessarily be with the other people that you're booked with if you don't pay to allocate a seat in advance. So I think it's a big thumbs down from me to Air France and KLM. I recently flew with them and enjoyed it, and I think this is definitely a bad move compared with what other airlines are doing. I think, if it was a fare like Qatar, for example, where they do a business light fare, then I think it's more transparent, and yes, you're saving some money not to have a seat. With this, you have no control over it. You basically get no seat unless you've got status, and you just have to take what's left at online check-in. For the remainder of the programme, I'm going to be talking about Heathrow's Terminal 3 and its oneworld lounges. You may wonder why I'm dedicating a whole programme to this. Well, it's one of the most frequently asked questions on many of the British Airways forums and Facebook groups, so I thought it was worth a bit of a refresh since the American Airlines First Class Lounge opened very recently, so it's worth going through all the different options again. You may not realise that if you have oneworld status or you're flying on a oneworld airline, you do not have to visit the lounge of the airline that you're flying with. You can visit any oneworld lounge. This applies everywhere in the world. There's the odd exception where at some airports they limit who can use the lounges. Qatar is a good example of this. So if you visit Qatar in Doha, for example, if you have status but don't have lounge access, then you will not be able to access the normal Qatar lounges. However, they do actually have separate lounges for people with status. So you still get lounge access, it's just a slightly different lounge. At Heathrow's Terminal 3, they have an absolute plethora of lounges. So if you're flying from there, I would advise getting there much earlier than usual if you want to do what we call a lounge crawl. There are a number of British Airways flights that fly from Terminal 3, and this varies from season to season. So it's always worth checking, because you may book it thinking that it's Terminal 5, and then actually when they switch from winter to summer or vice versa, it could well move. So keep an eye on it. There's also Finnair and Cathay that fly from Terminal 3, as well as Qantas. So you've got plenty of choice of lounges. I'll go through them one by one, and I'll start with what I think is the worst lounge, which may not go down well with some airlines. Personally, I think the worst lounge is actually the British Airways one, and yet a lot of people just automatically go there. I don't really know why. I think perhaps they don't understand that they can use other lounges. The positives are the lounge is very big. It has got a separate first class dining area, but it's nothing like the Concorde room. The food in there is exactly the same as you would get at Terminal 5. You've got your buffet with the usual sort of fish cakes and pies and some sort of, curry or stew, that type of food, and salads. So, it's not bad. The food's okay, but I wouldn't particularly go to visit the lounge for that. They do have champagne, which varies a lot at the moment. They have just announced that they're doing sparkling wine, English sparkling wine, and there are some nice ones there that are going to rotate through every 3 months. So it could be worth popping in if you fancy trying that, or just seeing what their wine selection is, because every now and again you get a bit of a gem in there. So it's worth a quick look, because the lounges are all very close to each other. They're all pretty much in a row together, so it's very easy to just pop into one or the other. There's no spa anymore at Heathrow's Terminal 3 for British Airways, so that kind of ruled out one of the reasons I used to go. However, in the evenings it is very quiet in there, so if you wanted a quiet space to work, for example, then that's probably a good option with tables and chairs you can sit at and a work area. There's also a kids' playroom, which you don't get in many of the other lounges, so that's another reason why you may want to pop into the British Airways lounge. I think the next one is probably the American Airlines lounge in terms of business class. They do have completely separate business and first class lounges. I think the business class is actually okay. It looks modern. It's had a bit of a refresh recently during COVID. And actually the buffet's not bad at all. They do have a Bloody Mary bar quite often, which I quite like. That's a bit of fun. You can add your own bits to make a Bloody Mary to your taste. They don't have any champagne. They usually have some sort of sparkling wine like a Prosecco, and their range of wines is okay. They normally have a rosé, which you don't tend to see as much in British Airways, although I have noticed now they've started doing Whispering Angel, if you like that brand of rosé. And again, in the evenings it's very, very quiet. It shuts quite early. I think it may be 7 o'clock, but I double checked that. But yeah, it tends to be very quiet in the evening, so it's again a good space if you just want to do a bit of work. The main highlight for me, other than the Bloody Mary bar, would be the sweetie bar. So somewhere towards the back of the lounge, you'll see a little row that looks like a sweet shop where you can go and help yourself to all different types of sweets. And they've even got those old-fashioned white and red striped bags that you used to get. So you can revisit your childhood, going to the village shop and getting a quarter of fizzy cola bottles or whatever you used to get by going and helping yourself to some sweets in the corner there. So we may as well look next at the American Airlines first class lounge, which, as I said, has just reopened. I quite like this lounge. A lot of people say it's not worth visiting. I like it because the staff are always super friendly and they do provide table service, which you don't get in some of the other lounges. The champagne in there is Moet. They have the Brut and also the Rosé. Not one of my particular favourites, but it's okay. And they also have a sweetie bar, but that one has Lindt chocolates. So you may want to just pop in to get your little fill of chocolates to take with you. The Wi-Fi in there is normally pretty good. So if you're working, again, it's usually quite quiet and the Wi-Fi speed is quite good in there. They have a buffet that's now been extended. I always thought it was pretty good before. And they also have a proper menu, which has some interesting breakfast dishes like avocado on toast and eggs Benedict. So if you fancy something like that, it could be worth popping in there. It tends to be quieter than the British Airways Lounge. And then they also have some other dishes for lunch and dinner, which are presented very nicely, a bit like fine dining, more so than you'd get in the British Airways Lounge. So all in all, I don't think it's bad. It's not very exciting. It's a bit grey inside, but otherwise it's worth popping into perhaps if you want to visit all the lounges. Next up for me would be the Qantas Lounge, and this again is a combined business and first class lounge. It has a gin bar, but unfortunately, as time's gone on, it's kind of been abandoned compared with how it was. You know, you used to get the Green Ant gin that was something a bit different. And yeah, the range of gins is much smaller nowadays, but it's still worth popping in there if you like a gin, because they do have a much better selection than the other lounges. Downstairs is also where they have the restaurant. Now, they only serve food at certain times that coincides with the Qantas flights. So you may want to go elsewhere if you want to eat and they don't have that menu available. The menu has some of the classics that you might see at other Qantas lounges, like the salt and pepper squid. However, in my opinion, I thought it was below par compared with the LA Lounge, for example. The squid was definitely frozen, or it tasted like it, and it wasn't as good as the standard you get elsewhere. I suspect this is down to how they're allowed to cook at Heathrow, because there are some restrictions to prevent fires. Other dishes on the menu included things like crumble for dessert, and I thought actually there was a quite wide range of different things to choose from, so I liked the menu if you can get in there when it's available. And I'd also say it does get very busy when the Qantas flights are going. So if you want peace and quiet, it's probably not for you when the restaurant's open. If you go upstairs there, it's got a lovely circular marble bar, which does look really luxurious, I think, and elegant. So that tends to be much quieter than downstairs. So if you don't mind a buffet, you can go upstairs. The buffet's pretty limited, I'd say. It's one of the smaller ones in Terminal 3. But if you just wanted a quick snack and you're not too fussy, then it's perfect for that. And it's upstairs. They don't have champagne unless you're in first class. They have usually an Australian sparkling wine, but it's very nice. They do have a good range of wines, particularly if you like Australian wine, and they have things like dessert wine as well, which you don't find in a lot of the other lounges. So in summary, it's great for some Australian wines, some dessert wine, and good when the restaurant's open, because the menu I found quite comprehensive, and there's probably something for everyone there. So next up would be the Cathay Business Class Lounge, which is my second favourite lounge at Heathrow. Now, if you like Asian food, this is definitely the go-to place, as you might expect. In the business class lounge, they have a buffet area. It's not massive or particularly comprehensive. However, the food is normally very good. It normally tastes fresh. There's quite a good choice of different types of food. So there's quite often something like a Thai curry, and then maybe something more neutral, like a bolognese and pasta, or some sort of dish in sauce, some sort of meat in sauce, and then they'll have salads and sandwiches as well. So if you wanted just something plainer, they do have that. And as I said, all the stuff I've had from there has been very tasty, and it's nicely presented as well. However, if you like Asian food, then you must go to the noodle bar. It's quite a large area, plenty of places to sit and booze, and you go up to the counter and order, and you normally get a little buzzer that will go off when your food is ready. My favourites there are the Dan Dan noodles. If you've never had them, it's like a spicy peanut sauce with noodles, so a little bit like satay but with noodles. It's really delicious. Probably highly fattening, but it tastes good. And I also like the dim sum selection there. But I believe the wonton soup is always pretty good as well from other people, though I've never tried it myself. Inside the lounge itself, they have a good range of cocktails. They normally have like a cocktail of the day or something similar, and sparkling wine, sometimes champagne, and a decent selection of wines. I like the seats there. There's quite a few comfy seats like sofas, and then they have these seats that go all along the window, so you get a good view. I didn't mention before with the Qantas lounge, but there's not much of a view from there. So if you want to see the airfield, then the Cathay Lounge is probably the best option in terms of views of the airfield. And the other thing that may sound slightly strange is if you need a shower or you need to use the toilets, I would also go to the Cathay Lounge. They used to have the Aesop toiletries in there, but it's now changed to Bamford. I think if you like Aesop, you'll also like Bamford. It has a wonderful, quite strong, sort of like spa-like smell. So and the toilets in there are always spotlessly clean. There's always attendants in there cleaning every couple of minutes. So that would be my choice to go to the toilet. And they do have showers in there. So if you need to freshen up if you're connecting or you just haven't had time to have a shower, then definitely I'd head to the Cathay Lounge for that. So finally, my favourite lounge at Terminal 3, in terms of oneworld at least, would be the Cathay First Class Lounge. Now obviously this is for people that have oneworld Emerald status, are travelling in first class, or have British Airways Gold, which is equivalent to Emerald status. Some people have said that the Cathay Lounge is not as good as it used to be. Personally, I haven't found that. I think the menu maybe is slightly smaller, but I still really enjoy it. I find it quite elegant. It's wearing well, although it was done quite a few years ago now. Has a lot of comfortable sitting spaces. It's not so great for working because the only tables at a decent height are actually in the restaurant, which is quite small. So if you want to work, I would probably head to the Qantas, American or British Airways lounges personally. Cathay for me is more about relaxing. So I normally head straight to the restaurant. However, they do have a small buffet area. It's very small here, like it's a few sandwiches and nibbles. It's not the same as you would get in the business class lounge, a bit less than that. That's because they have a full restaurant here that serves a lot more than just the noodles. But if you do like your noodles and dim sum, they do have that here as well. Some people have said that the menu's not as good. I think the food I've had is still as good, just I think it's a little bit more limited now. My favourite breakfast item is still the Asian breakfast. Now it does have congee on it, which I just don't get it. I know it's an Asian speciality. It's basically like a savoury porridge, but it doesn't do it for me. It's a bit like wallpaper paste if you ask me. So I just have it without that, and I have the noodles and the dim sum, which makes a great start to the day. They have good champagne in there. It's normally Laurent Perrier. Yes, it's not equivalent really to a first class champagne like you might get the Grand Siècle in British Airways Concorde room, but I think the Laurent Perrier standard champagne is, pretty good, and I enjoy drinking it. So it's probably the best champagne out of the oneworld lounges for me, unless you're flying on Qantas first class, and then you do get access to proper champagne in there. There's also a good selection of wines in there, and they do a few cocktails too. The menu is, as I said, smaller than it was before, but it does have a full 3 courses. So you get a starter, main and dessert if you want it at lunch and dinner. And at breakfast they have everything from, as I said, an Asian breakfast to more of your cooked breakfast, pastries, that sort of thing. So I enjoy popping in there and having a Bucks Fizz with my breakfast, or going in and having a proper meal if I don't want to eat on the flight. So for me, the food is definitely better in there. I think the overall ambiance is much nicer than the American Airlines lounge, and definitely better than British Airways, and it tends to be quieter as well. Again, it has good views, and it has what we call the throne seat, which is the corner seat that overlooks the airfield and has a comfy place to put your feet up. There's always a bit of a battle to get that perfect seat, and it's a good place to sit and relax. There's plenty of charging points as well, which you don't get in some of the other lounges. So that's my recommendation for a lounge if you have oneworld, Emerald status or British Airways Gold. I will just mention one other lounge, which a lot of oneworld people will have access to if they have an American Express card. That's the American Express Centurion lounge. Now, you don't need to have a Centurion card to enter. You can also enter with a Platinum card. So any Platinum card from American Express, including the business cards, will allow you access for free. They will ask to see your passport, and they'll also ask to see your boarding pass. I really like the American Airlines lounge, and I quite often will go in there even if I'm entitled to visit the oneworld lounges. It doesn't have any outside windows, which some people don't like, so there's no natural light, but actually I've never really even noticed that. So when I went for the initial look round, it was only afterwards when someone pointed it out to me that I suddenly twigged, because it doesn't feel oppressive. It feels light. It's very large, but it's divided into different sections, which I like. I think they've thought it out really well. They have quite a few booths for making private calls if you want some privacy when you're working. I really like these. These are just as you go in on the left-hand side. There's a little row of those. And then there's some other ones elsewhere that don't have the glass. So there's plenty of areas to get privacy. That first area is also great for working. There's desks there with PowerPoints and it's usually pretty quiet. So that's also another great place if you want to work. As well as that, they've got a bar area where they do some really good cocktails. These for me are the best cocktails that you get in Terminal 3 and they're all included. You don't have to pay for anything. They're pretty good modern cocktails. It does vary from time to time, but I always enjoy trying a couple of those. They have sparkling wine as well, and normally a selection of about 4 other wines. They're not necessarily the best wines, but they're drinkable. They're perfectly good. But generally I tend to stick to the cocktails or perhaps a Bucks Fizz. The reason that I particularly like it is because of the food in there. It definitely has a strong Middle Eastern influence down to the chef, but they also do lots of other things. It's in a small dish format, so there's a buffet there where there's lots of different things to choose from. Things like Arabic dips, salads, fresh fish. Breakfast, they have a good selection of things like shakshuka, as well as more traditional things, pastries, fruit, and cereals. They have coffee machines where you can help yourself. They also have sparkling and still water on tap. So I think that the food there is actually very good, and particularly good if you don't necessarily want to go to a restaurant setting and have to order something. You can grab things very quickly, and it's nice because you can have a selection of lots of different things, because as I said, they're small plates, so you get a bit of variety. And then beyond that, there is also a sitting area. And again, every single seat has a charging point. So it's really well designed from that point of view. If you want to charge some things, it's a good lounge for that, because you definitely won't be short of a power point. As well as that, they do have showers and the toilets, again, are really nice and have some nice toiletries in a sort of lemon fragrance, which I like, from a local London brand. And they also have a wellness room if you wanted to do some stretching or yoga, perhaps. So that's, again, worth considering. And as I said, you only need American Express Platinum card or Centurion card to access, and it's all free. So it's a pretty good perk of your card, I think. And it's also good later on in the evening if other lounges are closing. You can pop in there.